I froze with a paper cup of coffee in my hand as I heard my wife's voice drift across the crowded cafe. She was laughing. A soft, familiar laugh that I had fallen in love with 12 years ago. Then I heard the words that made the ground disappear beneath my feet. She told the stranger sitting beside her that she was single. Single. Not married. Not separated. Not going through a rough patch. Single. And she didn't know I was standing only a few feet behind her. Before we begin this emotional journey, take a moment to like this video, comment below, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to Storyverse if you still believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances. Sometimes the people we love carry secrets we never imagined, and sometimes those secrets change everything. The coffee shop was bright with afternoon sunlight pouring through the glass windows. People sat with laptops, friends laughed at nearby tables, and the smell of fresh pastries filled the air. It looked like a perfectly ordinary day. But for me, it became the day my life split into two pieces. My name is Rowan Mercer, and until that moment, I believed I had a happy marriage. My wife, Ilara, and I had met when we were both 24. She worked at a bookstore and spent her lunch breaks reading old novels in the park. I was an architect struggling to establish myself. She loved sunflowers, rainy afternoons, and old songs. I loved the way she could make ordinary things seem magical. We married 3 years later. The early years of our marriage were beautiful. We rented a tiny apartment with peeling wallpaper and a leaking sink. We didn't have much money, but we had dreams. We painted the walls together, ate noodles for dinner, and stayed awake planning the future. Then life happened. Careers became demanding. Bills grew larger. Responsibilities multiplied. I became successful and spent more hours at work. Meetings turned into late nights. Deadlines became excuses. I kept promising that things would slow down eventually. Eventually never came. I convinced myself that working hard was my way of loving her. I thought providing a comfortable life was enough. I never noticed how lonely she had become. That afternoon, I had left my office early because I wanted to surprise her. We hadn't spent a proper day together in months. I had bought tickets for a weekend trip and imagined her smile when I handed them to her. Instead, I found her in that cafe. She was sitting with an older woman I had never seen before. The stranger smiled warmly and asked something I couldn't hear. Then Ilara answered. She said she was single. I stood there in complete silence. The tickets in my jacket suddenly felt heavy. My heart pounded so hard that I could barely breathe. I expected anger. I expected betrayal. Instead, I felt something worse. Confusion. Because the woman I knew would never lie without a reason. I stepped forward. At that exact moment, Ilara looked up. Our eyes met. The color drained from her face. The smile disappeared. For a few seconds neither of us moved. The older woman looked between us, sensing the sudden tension. I remember how strange everything seemed. The clinking of cups sounded distant. The chatter around us became muffled. Then I placed the coffee on the nearest table and walked away. I didn't shout. I didn't ask questions. I simply walked out of the cafe. Behind me, I heard her calling my name. I kept walking. The sky was clear and blue, but it felt like a storm had suddenly begun inside me. I drove for hours that afternoon. I ended up near the lake where Ilara and I had our first date. I sat on a bench and stared at the water. How long had she been pretending to be single? Was there someone else? Had our marriage become a lie? Every possibility hurt. The sun began to set when my phone rang. Her name appeared on the screen. I couldn't answer. A few minutes later another call came. Then another. Then messages. Please talk to me. I can explain. Please come home. I turned off my phone. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't know if I wanted to go back. When darkness fell, I finally drove home. The lights inside the house were on. Ilara was sitting on the front steps. She looked like she had been crying for hours. As soon as she saw my car, she stood up. I walked past her and unlocked the door. She followed me inside. Neither of us spoke. The silence felt unbearable. Then she finally said something. She said she was sorry. I looked at her and asked the only question that mattered. Why? She sat down slowly, and I noticed her hands trembling. Then she said something I never expected. She said she didn't remember being married. For several seconds I simply stared at her. The words made no sense. She explained that 6 months earlier she had been involved in a minor car accident. I remembered the accident. She had called me from the hospital and said she was fine. The doctors treated her for a concussion and sent her home. She insisted it was nothing serious. I believed her. But she admitted that something had happened after that day. She had started forgetting things. At first it was small details. Appointments. Names. Where she left her keys. Then the memory gaps became larger. She would wake up confused. Sometimes she couldn't remember entire conversations. A few weeks earlier she had looked at our wedding photo and felt nothing. She knew I was important. She knew we lived together. But she couldn't remember falling in love with me. Couldn't remember our wedding. Couldn't remember our life. I thought she was joking. I thought she was trying to avoid the real issue. Then she opened a drawer and handed me a stack of medical papers. Neurological evaluations. Brain scans. Doctor's notes. One sentence stood out. Post-traumatic memory disorder. I sat down. Suddenly everything around me seemed unreal. She had been carrying this alone. She explained that she had been attending a support group for people dealing with memory loss. The woman in the cafe was one of the volunteers. They had been discussing identity and lost memories. The stranger had asked if she was married. Ilara had answered honestly. Because inside her mind, she didn't feel married. She didn't remember becoming someone's wife. She said calling herself single was easier than explaining the truth to every person she met. Then she began crying. She said she had hidden everything because she was afraid. Afraid that I would look at her differently. Afraid that I would leave. Afraid that I would hate her for forgetting us. I didn't know what to say. How could someone forget an entire love story? How could 12 years disappear? I looked at our wedding picture hanging on the wall. 2 smiling people. A life built together. 1,000 memories. And for her, it was all blank. That night neither of us slept. We sat in the living room until sunrise. She told me things I had never noticed. How she often pretended to remember conversations. How she secretly read our old photo albums. How she studied my face, hoping a memory would return. How every day she woke up feeling like a stranger in her own life. I realized she had been suffering in silence while I buried myself in work. I remembered the evenings when she seemed distant. The times she looked at me as though she wanted to ask something. The moments I ignored because I was too busy. The truth hurt more than betrayal ever could. Because I hadn't lost my wife to another person. I had been slowly losing her to something invisible. The following weeks changed everything. I began leaving work early. I accompanied her to every doctor's appointment. I listened. For the first time in years, I truly listened. The doctors couldn't promise her memories would return. Some patients recovered completely. Others remembered only fragments. Some never remembered at all. There was no certainty. Only hope. One afternoon I found Alara sitting on the bedroom floor surrounded by old photographs. She held one picture in her hand. It was from our honeymoon. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. She said the woman in the photograph looked happy, but she couldn't remember being her. I sat beside her. We spent hours going through pictures. I told her stories. The day we got engaged. The time we got lost during a road trip. The first apartment. The night our power went out and we ate candlelit sandwiches. She listened carefully. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she cried. But no memories came back. I began to understand something important. I kept trying to make her remember the woman she used to be. Meanwhile, she was struggling to become someone she could understand. One evening we visited the lake where we had our first date. The sky was golden. Birds floated across the water. I told her how nervous I had been that day. How I almost cancelled because I thought she was too beautiful for me. She laughed softly. Then she said something that broke my heart. She said she wished she could remember falling in love with me. I looked at her. And for the first time, I asked myself a terrifying question. If she never remembered us, could we fall in love again? The months passed. I became a different man. I worked less. I cooked dinner. We took long walks. We talked for hours. I learned things about her that I had forgotten. She still loved sunflowers. She still cried during sad movies. She still smiled at stray cats. In many ways she was the same person. But she was also someone new. One morning I woke up and found her watching me. She said she had a dream. In the dream we were dancing in the rain. I smiled. Because it wasn't a dream. It had happened 10 years earlier. For the first time, a memory had returned. It was small. Blurry. But it was real. From that day, tiny fragments began coming back. A song. A restaurant. The smell of my old jacket. A birthday. A road trip. The memories returned like scattered pieces of glass. Not enough to rebuild everything. But enough to give us hope. Then came the hardest day. We visited our old apartment building. The place where our life together had begun. The building had been renovated, but the small courtyard remained the same. We sat on a bench. She looked around quietly. Then she suddenly started crying. I panicked. I thought something was wrong. But she smiled through her tears. She remembered. She remembered painting the walls. She remembered burning dinner. She remembered dancing barefoot in the kitchen. I cried too. Because after months of darkness, a piece of our life had returned. That evening we celebrated with takeout and cheap cake. It felt like we were newly married. But recovery wasn't perfect. Some memories remained missing. Entire years were still blank. Some mornings she recognized everything. Other days she looked lost again. Healing was not a straight line. It moved forward and backward. There were setbacks. There were tears. There were moments of despair. But there was also something unexpected. We began creating new memories. I took her to places we had never visited. We watched sunrises together. We planted flowers in the backyard. We started dating again. I realized something beautiful. Love isn't only built from memories. Sometimes it is built from choosing the same person over and over again. One afternoon we returned to the same cafe where I overheard her say she was single. We sat at the exact table. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The memory of that painful day returned to me. I asked her if she still felt single. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached for my hand. She said she didn't remember every detail of our marriage. But she knew one thing. Every morning she wanted to wake up beside me. Every evening she wanted to come home with me. And every day she was falling in love with me again. I couldn't speak. Because those words meant more than remembering. They meant choosing. Months later, on a bright spring morning, I took her back to the lake. The same bench. The same water. The same gentle breeze. I held a small box in my hand. Inside was her wedding ring. She had stopped wearing it after the memory loss because it felt strange to her. I got down on one knee. People nearby stopped and watched. I asked her if she would marry me again. She cried. I cried. The whole world seemed to pause. Then she said yes. It wasn't our first proposal. But somehow it felt even more special. Because this time we both understood how fragile love truly is. We married again 3 months later. A small ceremony. Only close friends and family. Sunflowers everywhere. As she walked toward me, I realized something. The woman coming down the aisle wasn't the same woman I had married 12 years earlier. And I wasn't the same man either. We had both changed. We had both been broken. But somehow, through loss and fear and uncertainty, we had found each other again. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone you love. Stories like these remind us that even when memories fade, love can still find its way back. As the ceremony ended, Elara slipped the ring onto her finger and smiled. Then she whispered something I will never forget. She said maybe she had lost her memories because life wanted her to fall in love with me twice. I have carried those words in my heart ever since. Because sometimes the worst moments in our lives are not endings. Sometimes they are invitations to begin again. Before this story ends, I have one special request. Comment below with the words, "Love remembers the way." A year has passed since our second wedding. Some memories have returned. Others probably never will. But every morning I wake up beside the woman I love. And every morning she smiles at me as though she is still discovering me. There are days when she asks me to tell her our favorite stories again. And I do. Every single time. Because love is patient. Love repeats itself. Love stays. I once believed the most painful thing I could ever hear was my wife telling a stranger she was single. Now I understand that the real tragedy would have been walking away before learning the truth. Because behind those heartbreaking words was a woman fighting to remember who she was. And behind my anger was a husband who needed to learn how to love again. Sometimes people don't need perfect memories. Sometimes they only need someone willing to hold their hand while they search for themselves. And if you are lucky enough to love someone, remind them often. Spend time with them. Listen to them. Create memories while you can. Because life can change in a single afternoon. And yet, even after everything, love can still survive. Sometimes it can even become stronger than before.